the morning they came to take everything from me, I was sitting at my kitchen table drinking coffee in my own home. A home that, as of 6 hours earlier, they believed was theirs. I remember watching the front door swing open without so much as a knock. My stepmother Diane walked in first, chin lifted, keys already in her hand like she'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. My father followed 2 steps behind her, the way he always did. Hands in his pockets, eyes slightly downcast, letting her lead while pretending he wasn't complicit. And behind them both was my stepbrother Marcus, filming on his phone, grinning like this was content. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd been waiting for this exact morning for 4 months. Let me take you back to where this really started. Because the betrayal didn't happen overnight. It was slow, the way mold grows behind a wall. Invisible, patient, eating through everything until suddenly the whole structure collapses. My name is Elena. I was 18 years old when my grandmother died, and she left me everything. Not because she was playing favorites, because she understood people. Grandma Rosa had watched my father's second marriage the way you watch weather. You don't trust, politely, from a distance, with one eye always on the horizon. She'd seen how Diane subtly redirected conversations, rearranged holiday plans, slowly repositioned herself at the center of every family decision. She'd seen how my father, a man I once believed was strong, had become someone who needed to be told what to think before he thought it. So Grandma Rosa made a choice. She left me the house, the one she'd lived in for 40 years, the one where I'd spent every summer of my childhood, along with a modest but meaningful savings account. Around $1,340,000 total, between the property value and the liquid assets. I was her only grandchild. She said I was the only one she trusted to keep something real alive. When the will was read, Diane didn't cry. She just got very, very quiet. And quiet, I had learned by then, was her most dangerous state. For the first few weeks after the funeral, everything seemed fine. Sad, but fine. My father hugged me at the gravesite and told me Grandma Rosa had loved me more than anything. Diane smiled the smile she reserved for public performances. Marcus shrugged and scrolled his phone. I was 18, freshly graduated from high school, enrolled in community college for the fall. I moved into my house and started making it mine. I hung curtains, I planted herbs in the window boxes. I slept in the small bedroom at the back where the morning light came in gold and warm. The same room I'd slept in every summer since I was 4 years old. And then, slowly, the pressure started. It began with suggestions. My father would call and mention, casually, that the property taxes on a house like that were really substantial, and that maybe it would be smart to talk to someone about managing the estate together. Together. As though I hadn't noticed that together in my family always meant Diane's hands on the wheel. Then came the visits. Diane would stop by unannounced, walking through rooms like she was appraising them, touching things, rearranging things, making comments. This furniture is so dated, Elena. You know, this neighborhood is really picking up. The timing to sell would be incredible right now. Your grandmother would have wanted what's best for the whole family. That last line, that one made something cold settle in my stomach. I started paying attention differently after that. I listened to phone calls I wasn't meant to hear. I noticed how my father's visits always seemed to follow Diane's, like a second wave meant to reinforce whatever she'd planted. I overheard Marcus tell a friend on the phone that the house situation would be sorted out by summer. He was 19. He didn't have a plan for anything in his life except the ones Diane made for him. So where did he think he was getting a house? One evening, I found paperwork on the kitchen counter that hadn't been there when I left for class. It was a deed transfer form partially filled out in my father's handwriting, with my name in one of the signature lines. Blank. Waiting. I stood there for a long time, holding that paper, feeling something shift inside me. Not panic. Not even anger. Not yet. Something quieter and more clarifying than either of those things. So this is what we're doing. I didn't confront anyone. I folded the paper up, put it in my bag, and the next morning I drove to see my grandmother's attorney, a sharp, silver-haired woman named Patricia who had handled Grandma Rosa's estate and who, I suspected, had genuinely liked her. I laid everything out. The suggestions, the visits, the form. Patricia looked at the document for a long moment. Then she looked at me. "How old are you, Elena?" 18, I said. "As of last month." She nodded slowly. "Then you're old enough to do something very smart." She paused. "If you want to." She explained what a revocable trust was. She explained how, if the assets were transferred into a trust with me as both grantor and sole beneficiary, any attempt to pressure, manipulate, or legally challenge my ownership became dramatically more complicated. The house, the account, they wouldn't be in my name as a private individual anymore, they'd be held by the trust. And the trust had one beneficiary: me. She also told me something else. She told me she'd received a call from my father's attorney 3 weeks prior, inquiring about the contestability of my grandmother's will on grounds of undue influence. The argument being that Grandma Rosa had been unduly influenced by her relationship with me to exclude other family members. There were no other family members in that will because there were no other blood relatives. But the inquiry had been made. Your grandmother was sharp until the day she died, Patricia said firmly. That challenge would go nowhere. But it tells you something about intent, doesn't it? It told me everything. I signed the trust documents 4 days later. Patricia filed them quietly. The transfer was completed, recorded, and done. The house was no longer simply Elena Vasquez's house. It was the property of the Rosa Elena Vasquez Family Trust. I didn't tell a single person. I went home, made dinner, and watered my herbs in the window box, and I waited. I didn't have to wait long. 6 weeks later, my father called and asked me to come to dinner. It was framed as a family thing, a reconnecting, and something in his voice told me the performance had been rehearsed. I went. I ate the food Diane had cooked, and said the right things, and watched Marcus smirk at his phone, and I kept my face open and pleasant, and gave them absolutely nothing to read. 2 days after that dinner, a notice arrived at the house. My father had, with Diane's orchestration, filed a formal legal claim. Not a will contest this time, but a petition for equitable redistribution on the grounds that Grandma Rosa's estate had been mismanaged, and that as her surviving son, he had a rightful interest in the property. It was aggressive. It was ugly. And it was, Patricia confirmed with a calm that I tried to mirror. Unlikely to succeed. But it would take time, and it was clearly designed to exhaust me. An 18-year-old girl, alone, managing a legal battle. They expected me to crack. They expected me to call my father crying and ask what I needed to sign to make it stop. I did call him. I asked if we could talk. He sounded relieved, almost gentle, and said, "Of course. Come over in the morning, we'll work everything out." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my grandmother's house, my house, and I listened to the sounds of it settling in the dark, the familiar creak of the hallway floor, the way the wind moved through the old window frames. I thought about every summer I'd spent here. I thought about my grandmother's hands, how they always smelled like lavender and dish soap. I thought about how she'd looked at me, really looked at me, the way very few people ever had. She had trusted me with the most permanent thing she owned. I was not going to give it away to people who had never seen me at all. The next morning, I didn't go to my father's house. Instead, I called Patricia and told her I was ready to stop playing defense. We filed a counter motion. Patricia had spent the past several weeks quietly gathering documentation, records that showed the original will had been prepared over 2 years before my grandmother's death, updated at her own initiative, witnessed and notarized with full legal rigor. She had affidavits from Grandma Rosa's doctor confirming full cognitive competency. She had correspondence, emails and letters in my grandmother's own handwriting, expressing her clear wishes and her reasons for them. And here was the piece I hadn't expected. Patricia had also found evidence that my father, in the year before my grandmother's death, had twice petitioned her to co-sign loans using the house as collateral. Grandma Rosa had refused both times. She'd documented her refusals in writing and letters to Patricia, specifically because she'd been afraid of exactly this. She'd seen it coming. She built the wall before she left. When our counterfiling landed on my father's attorney's desk, I was told the response was a prolonged silence, followed by a request for a settlement meeting. At that meeting, my father sat across a conference table from me for the first time in a legal setting, and I watched him look at the documents in front of him. The letters in his mother's handwriting, the evidence of his own loan request, the ironclad trust structure. And I watched something in his face go through several stages before arriving at something I'd never seen there before. Shame. Not performed, not managed for an audience. Real. Diane sat beside him, and for once in my life I watched her be completely, utterly still. Here's the moment I want you to feel, because I replayed it for a long time afterward. My father looked up from the documents and looked at me across that table, and he started to say something. I think he was going to say he was sorry, or that he hadn't understood, or that Diane had told him it was the right thing to do. And I just held up one hand, very gently, and shook my head. I didn't need it, not in that room, not in front of his attorneys and mine and the woman who had engineered this whole campaign against his own daughter. I let the papers speak instead. The petition was withdrawn. All of it, the legal claim, the motions, everything. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue a malicious litigation claim, which Patricia had told me I had a reasonable basis for. I didn't want a prolonged war. I wanted it over. I wanted them to know it was over. And I wanted to go home. But here's what I didn't plan for. The part of this story that still catches me off guard when I think about it. The morning after the petition was withdrawn, before I'd even told anyone what had happened, my father showed up at the house. Without Diane. Without Marcus. Just him, standing on the porch in the early morning with his hands in his pockets, looking older than I'd ever seen him look. I opened the door and stood in the frame and didn't invite him in, and didn't close the door either. He said, "Your grandmother called me about 6 months before she died. She told me what she was planning. She said she was doing it because you were the only one she trusted to protect what she'd built." He stopped. I told Diane, and Diane told me that was unfair, that we should fight it. He looked down at his shoes. I let her tell me what to think again. I've been doing that for years, and I keep losing things because of it. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was just saying it. Out loud, maybe for the first time. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I said, "I know, Dad." I didn't open the door wider. I wasn't there yet. Maybe I'd get there, maybe I wouldn't. But I wasn't going to make that decision in a doorway before I was ready. He nodded like that was fair, and he left. I still live in that house. The herbs in the window box have spread into a small raised garden along the south wall. I finished community college and transferred to a 4-year program. I rent out the back room to a graduate student who is quiet and kind and who leaves coffee on the counter sometimes when she knows I have early class. I see my father occasionally. Alone, always alone, which tells me things about his marriage I don't ask about directly. We're not close. We're something more careful and honest than close, which I think might be better. Diane and Marcus, I haven't spoken to since that conference room. Patricia sends me a holiday card every December. This past year it said, "Your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing." She did. And so did I. I think about what this whole experience taught me. Not in a tidy lesson kind of way, but in the way that real things teach you, which is messily and slowly and usually only in hindsight. It taught me that protecting yourself isn't the same thing as being cold. I loved my father through all of this. I was heartbroken through all of this. Doing the smart thing and feeling the sad thing at the same time. That's not a contradiction. That's just what it is to be a woman navigating a world where people sometimes count on you being too emotional to be strategic, and too young to know your own rights. My grandmother knew I could be both. She left me everything because she believed that. I spend a lot of time in the back bedroom now, where the morning light still comes in gold and warm. Some mornings I just sit there with my coffee and I let myself feel how lucky I am. Not because I won, but because she knew me well enough to set up the board before she left. If you've made it this far, I want to ask you something genuinely. Have you ever been in a position where someone you loved underestimated you? Where they thought they knew exactly how the story was going to end, and you had to quietly rewrite it without them knowing? I want to hear about it because I think a lot of us have been in that room, that conference room, or that doorway, or that kitchen table with someone else's paperwork waiting for our signature. And not all of us had a Patricia or a grandmother who planned ahead, but some of us figured it out anyway. Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if this resonated with you, if you've ever had to protect yourself from the people who are supposed to protect you first, then you already know why stories like this matter. Like, subscribe, and I'll keep telling them.